My game is not playing right now for some reason. Hold on. It's uh the game. I have the trailer pulled, or not the trailer, but like a long play pulled up, and it's not playing.
Oh no.
All right, there we go. My game is Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. This was It's an interesting game. I didn't look it up. I probably should have, but in general, what I've come to understand about it is that it was Square Enix's answer to people not really loving RPGs in the West, and them kind of assuming that it's because we can't really handle it. Like our little brains couldn't comprehend the idea of stats in Final Fantasy. So they wanted to make something that was a little more streamlined, something that we could play that was more akin to what we were used to. It was less like stat based. It was more simplified, I guess. So it often gets the moniker of like Final Fantasy for babies. And I've heard it get a lot of shit talked about it online. So I was curious to try it. I got I got a little bit less than halfway through on my current playthrough. Um, my reactions to it are a little bit mixed. I'll get started on what it is. It in a way plays like a traditional Final Fantasy, but it combines concepts from, and I'll use some of the contemporaries because this is a Super Nintendo game. Super Mario World and Zelda. So it's got some things that those kinds of people that played those games would appreciate. Its map isn't like a free form map that you can just walk around in like a traditional RPG. It's more of you see the overworld and your character, and then he just walks almost like a Super Mario World overworld where you go from level to level. And you go to the next level, and sometimes that level is a town, sometimes it's a dungeon. Rarely it's like a forest or something where you can, I guess that's kind of a dungeon. Um and then sometimes it's little challenge spots where you just have to beat an enemy 10 times. It's very weird. Maybe one of the dumber ideas. But your equipment doesn't, at least at this point, it doesn't seem to upgrade in the traditional sense. You'll get different weapons that have different strengths, and you can also use those weapons outside of combat, which I thought was really cool. And that's kind of where the Zelda stuff comes in, is you can get bombs, and of course you can bomb walls with it. Or you can get these claws, and with those claws you can actually climb mountains. You can scale with them. You get an axe, you can chop down trees. So there's actual utility in the weapons, which I thought was actually kind of genius. I really liked it. Um, it continues the spell system, ironically, of the original Final Fantasy, which I think is a more confusing spell system than people are used to. So in that way, the magic is probably more confusing, even though it's supposed to be for babies. But it follows the traditional D&D style of magic, where you have spell slots. The spell slots are simplified though, because in traditional D&D and in Final Fantasy you had spell slot levels. So you had like level 1 spells, level 2 spells, level 3 spells. I forget the cap on that, but you get what I mean, where it's just different levels. Whereas in this game, the spell slots are light, dark, just different kinds of magic, as opposed to levels of the spells. So you just have, until your rest, you have that many spells you can cast of that type. And then each person has their own spells, but they share the same, basically the same spell list. So not too complex there. In playing it, you can really see that they were trying to make something that Americans like. The writing is actually like really good. I was surprised by the amount of expression that the characters have. Where it actually reminds me of like the Mario and Luigi series, where the one of the characters will kind of take shots at the writing and make like tongue in cheek comments. So that was really cool. And there's a running joke in the game that you just kind of have to get used to, where the main character like shrugs. He goes, and that it's got its own animation. They use it a lot. Very interesting. the sense of humor really threw me off. I was surprised that because when I always hear about this game, it's like it's a low res Final Fantasy. It's a Final Fantasy for babies, but the amount of detail in it and the amount of ideas that were put into it were surprising. Like I wasn't really expecting that level. I was expecting very dumbed down, very simplistic. And in some ways it is, and in some ways it really isn't. The graphics look nice during battles. Outside of battle, it looks a little low poly, but again, I think this is earlier SNES. So I almost give it a pass. There aren't any random battles in the game. All the enemies you can see on screen, which is refreshing for a game of this age. Granted, they serve an additional purpose. They'll actually block passages in the dungeons, so they do serve an alternative purpose. But still, cool to see a game at this stage that didn't have random battles. That's something that they do now. It's almost unheard of to have random battles in an RPG. Overall, actually quite impressed with this game. It's certainly not like gonna win any awards for the greatest RPG ever. I'm not gonna make that case, but for all the stuff I heard about this game, it's actually quite competent. And if you understand what they were trying to do and not try to, make a game that's competing with Final Fantasy 3 or, in Real World 6, then there's a lot to appreciate here. So, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, I actually give it, 2 thumbs up. Pretty good.
I thought you were gonna give it a number rating.
Oh, I give it I would give it like a 6 out of 10 or something.
6 buttons out of 10.
6 buttons on your sweater or whatever. 6.
Who knew?
Wow, Ted Woolsey was one of the writers for the game.
Who?
He did like all
Ted
those. Huh?
Woolsey. He was a Dragon Quest guy.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Well, he's like a translator, right?
Yeah. I have the dates up. This game came out in North America before, like a year ahead of Japan.
Yeah, that makes sense because it's supposed to be for America. So maybe he was like legitimately a writer on it.
Wow. Who knew that's where Cloud Shrug came from?
Yeah. It's the origin story for Cloud Shrug.
Cloud's famous shrug. Yeah, this game's always kind of funny to me because it was an idea. I think it was a novel idea, something that I'd say would only work at this point, but they actually tried it again later, I think, in multiple ways. But they're trying to make an RPG for people that don't really know RPGs or know how to play an RPG. And this game has been buried by Square Enix for the most part, except for oddly enough, in the last, I think it was the last, or the Theater Rhythm for 3DS, they actually had tracks from Mystic Quest, which was really bizarre to see that. I was like, "Whoa, hey, Mystic Quest is here." That's weird. But yeah, it's a fascinating idea to me to do that. And I understand wanting to lead people into it. I think they did it again later, but in a different way with the Crystal Chronicles series of games, because those are also baby's first RPG in a lot of ways. But they do they have a very different approach. So that's why I said I think they tried this again later, but they didn't really take this same approach. But it is an interesting idea.
I could see why Americans might be offended by the insult to their intelligence. I mean, while I think I understand the first Dragon Quest is really cryptic, but everyone I knew here who grew up with Final Fantasy 1 was a big fan of it, and I feel like that game was pretty self-explanatory. The concept is right, I think, make games more accessible, but you also have a 2-person RPG system. I don't know. It seems like a step back, You're gonna give me this hand-me-down Final Fantasy game?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to understand that RPGs weren't exactly popular in the West. As much as we say people that liked Final Fantasy 1 would see this as an insult, there was a handful of those people, and then everybody else was playing Mario. So they didn't really scoop this up as much. I mean, it had certain levels of success because they kept making them, but I think this was their attempt to try to make it much more broad, which clearly was probably a failure because everyone knows that it really kicked off with Final Fantasy VII. But
right,
it's interesting, that, if anything, just to see what they were trying to come up with to get those darn gamers back then.
Isn't that kind of funny how like they went with the simplest route and it didn't work, and then they did 7, which is like from a story standpoint is like one of the most convoluted stories,
Yeah.
and it worked flawlessly.
Yeah, they just
Yeah.
did not understand America at all, which is this is funny.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah.
It does look a lot like Evo Land, and I think the Zelda stuff like makes it, I don't know, feel like that attempt at evolution.
Well, it reminded me of like a scene in Final Fantasy IX that always left, like even when I first played it, it left my head scratching at like what could be, because in Final Fantasy IX there's a scene where you're in an ice cave and you guys are kind of just moving around and fighting, doing this, and you come to a part where you're blocked, and there's clearly a door, but it's blocked by ice, and they're like, "Hey, Vivi, why don't you just light that on fire?" And he's like, "Oh, good idea." And then he lights it on fire, the ice melts, and you continue. And I'm just like, Vivi has a lot of spells. Like, why can't you traverse the world using the tools that you have? Like, that's kind of genius, but that's literally like the only scene in that game where they do that. And it's not like a gaming moment. It's it's basically a cutscene. And it's like, it's this game actually does it, where you get equipment and you can use the equipment in the world, which is a very novel idea, and something I'm surprised they haven't really latched onto.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that in just in games in general. It's like for narrative purposes, characters will be like, "I can do this," and then you go and you can't jump over like a chest high wall.
Yeah.
It's like what? But and I was just sitting here thinking as well, like this is kind of funny to look at because in some ways, like Square Enix has never dropped this approach because it seems like they're always trying to dumb down Final Fantasy in some way to get a bigger audience, to better or worse. I mean,
Mhm.
as much as I have enjoyed some of the more recent games, they're definitely still in that era where they're like, look, it's an action game. So yeah, it's kind of weird to like see like this started on the Super Nintendo with them trying this.
Mhm. I appreciate though that they didn't make it a numbered entry. It was like, it's not considered one of the the numerical. I almost said canon. It's definitely, there is no Final
Canon.
Fantasy canon, but
No, there is. Have you played Dissidia? They're all in there.
oh yeah, I forgot. They all
They're all
met up.
there. They're all hung out. They went to Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
At the buffet.
But yeah, that's a good point. This does kind of continue the trend of Square Enix dumbing down their own property just to get more people interested. Yeah. And hey, look, back then it didn't work. So why do you
Stop
keep doing it?
Stop doing it. I know. I see reports recently where it's like 16 lost a bunch of money, and it's like, I wonder why.
Yeah.
Because Final Fantasy fans don't want it.
Square. For those that care, I did play this game a little bit with headphones on, and the music is surprisingly good. So,
Oh my god. Really?
yeah, it's
You?
quite good. It's more of like a rock style music, which again maybe harkens to the idea that they're hearkening to Americans, but still, it's good. It's good. It means nothing to me. I didn't play it long, but if you like that stuff, there's music here.
As music confirmed.
Can you
Shit with
give
a
us some of it?
soundtrack.
Can you give us some of the music right now?
No,
You can't sing it?
no.
Oh.
Bum 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 ba da 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 da.
Yeah,
That's copyright infringement, I think.
Link. He goes to town.
we've already
He
been
goes to
flagged.
save Princess Zelda.
That's just moving down. Doing Zelda.
All right, let's talk
And that
about.
was Teddy doing System of a Down doing Zelda.
Let's get some questions here or comments. Terry says, "Oh no, not Zelda. Good lord, talk about how to ruin a video game, make it like Zelda. Yeah, one of the most successful franchises of all time. I find it interesting and sort of relieving that the second character auto fights, so you don't have to press X twice. Yes, your character can auto fight. You can select him or her to be controlled or auto fight. So,
Oh my god, that's literally what they do now.
yeah.
That's what I was. That's I'm like at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and that's literally how that game works. Is that I can like jump in and be like, "Hey Tifa, could you like use thunder or some shit?" But like I could also just leave her alone.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
There you go. So Final Fantasy Mystic Quest is essentially the canceled episode of Seinfeld. Was there a canceled episode of Seinfeld that I don't know about?
No, Seinfeld ended and then went to jail. That's the true. That's the actual last episode of Seinfeld, by the way.
Well, I know, but was there a canceled episode of Seinfeld that we don't know?
I'm sure at some point. I don't know. I mean, he's talking about the Shrug.
Oh. So this is essentially the best Final Fantasy game for people like Alex. Oh, come on now. Alex
like
played 1, he
dude,
played 7.
12 is my favorite. 12 is like one of the more complicated ones.
Remember that Final Fantasy IV was dumbed down for Western audiences too. The original SNES release, yeah. But Mystic Quest isn't even that bad of a Final Fantasy game, really. If you want a bad Final Fantasy game, play Dirge of Cerberus. And then Tyler says, I want to play Final Fantasy for babies now. Yeah, you should. It's not bad.
Crystal Chronicles.
Chocobo Mystery Dungeon.
Yeah, well, yeah, kind of.
It is hard at points.
All those, I think the Mystery Dungeon games, all those games are like, they look like they're for babies, and then you get into it, and it just was like ruins your life when you get further in. You're like, shit. You're like on like dungeon, like floor 50, and you just fucking get demolished. No.
Terry's calling you out. He says 12 is not complicated. It literally plays itself.
Yeah, but that's why it's you have to use the Gambit system, and there's also if you're playing the original version, there's also the license system, which they took out of the new one. And that was like an extra layer of bullshit you had to deal with. I'm glad to get rid of that.
Yeah, and the newest one they did, and then they let you switch jobs, which is fucking cool.
Yeah, they didn't have that in the original, which sucked.
The Zodiac
you were locked in on the PS2 version.
Yeah. No, I love that grid. I love any grid in any RPG. If you give me that, I'll just love it. So I love that in Final Fantasy 12. That's awesome. Yeah. The Gambit system I'm okay with, but it kind of reminded me of like KOTOR almost, but
yeah,
you got just like a lot more granular control over what they did. I don't know if I liked it or didn't like it. I didn't get too into that part of it.
I love it, man, because you have like 6 or 7 commands at a time you can list out, and like importance for each character. So it's kind of fun to like even if you fail a boss, to go back and be like, okay, I'm gonna like try this different setup and this different thing. So
maybe if I got further in, because I noticed that it's weird, like you get more gambits as you go.
Yeah,
and so it's like
they just pile on.
It's weird that they wouldn't just give you all of them. Like, it's weird that they're
maybe they don't want to overwhelm you with it.
Maybe
I don't know.
Maybe that makes sense, because it's weird that they are just like, here's all of them so you can use them, and instead they're like, this is a mechanic in the game, but we're only gonna. It's like giving you like half of the volume bar, or it's like you can get it up to 50%, and you'll be able to get it to 100 later. It's just really quiet at the beginning of the game. I don't know why. But no, I think that's a good game. We should actually consider that sometime, Alex. I remember Final Fantasy X was the shoot. I think I know what he means. I remember someone streamed Final Fantasy 12 went AFK to take a shit, and the end cutscene was playing while he was taking a dump. Final Fantasy 12.
Well, that's a good transition back to crap talk.
Yeah.
I love the crap stories.
Yeah. So there's Mystic Quest.
Would you call it the crap shoot?
Mystic Quest, or this whole thing?
Well, I don't know. Tyler said, what was it? 12 was the shoot? 10 was the shoot.
I think he's
Mystic
trying
Quest,
not to get
crap shoot.
He meant 12. But
I think he also meant he just doesn't want to get his thing blocked. It's supposed to be an I.
Yeah.
Crap shit?
Crap
He
shit.
likes 12.
It was the shit. So
He likes
is
12.
Mystic Quest the crap shit? Shoot.
All right.
Hey y'all, don't forget to subscribe to them button mappers.